It's very common in discussions of race to have white people tell you about all the people of color in their lives, right? Oh, I have these coworkers, or my best friend, or my second cousin married a black man, or all of the ways that we want everyone to know that we have relationships with people of color, okay? And so we're giving you evidence. Right? When someone tells you that, they're giving you evidence. And so what are they giving you evidence of? They're giving you evidence that because they love people of color, know and love people of color, they can't be racist, which means they see racism as conscious dislike or explicit bias or hatred, right? And they're communicating to you that they don't have conscious dislike or hatred, as evidenced by all of these people in their lives. And what we don't understand is the power of implicit bias. Most bias is unconscious. And that makes it very, very dangerous because it drives our behaviors, but we're not aware of it. Yes, it's wonderful to have people of color in your life if you're white. Many, many, many people, white people, don't have people of color in close relationships. But that doesn't mean your life is free of racism. That doesn't mean you don't have a white experience or a white perspective. And it also doesn't mean that racism will not surface in your relationships with people of color.
Now, today I've learned something new, that in the United States of America, or even some other white countries, we have something we call new way of racism or new way of segregation. Now, for example, in America, they had this app called Sketch App, where when you have gone into a new neighborhood as a white person, I have the opportunity to view which is a bad neighborhood or good neighborhood, which is a good school or bad school, good hospital or bad hospital. And when we say bad or good, does not mean bad or good. White neighbor or good neighborhood means a neighborhood that has white people, and bad neighborhood is a neighborhood that has black people. Bad school is a school that has the other race. Good schools is a school fit for white. Bad hospital is a hospital that is for the other race, like black race. And good hospitals is good fit for white. So white people, they want to remain in power, and they have come up with even better ideas to segregate, to play their racist cards. And I came to realize that being not racist as a white person is just not enough. Yeah. And we'll talk about that as we continue. White privilege is a discussion that a lot of white people will not want to talk about it, because once you're benefiting from something, you have to hold on to it. There's something we call deconstructing white privilege. This involves examining the social, economic, and cultural advantages that white people often experience in societies, especially in contexts where race plays a significant role in shaping opportunities and life experience. And constructing white privilege, it's about critical analyzing how systems of power and privilege are structured and maintained, and how those who are identified as white tend to benefit from it. And the reason why white people will not want to discuss these issues is because when we reduce the privilege, that means that they will reduce their power. And of course, white people want to remain in power. That's why they have this what we call white supremacy, white privilege, because all of this, it shapes how their race is on top. Now, in today's video, we are going to listen this video of Dr. Robin discussing about deconstructing white privilege. And as I said earlier, it's a discussion that a lot of white people will not be happy with it. But let's listen to it, and then we'll come back again and talk about it.
I'm Dr. Robin DeAngelo, and my work focuses on the question of what does it mean to be white in a society that proclaims race meaningless, yet is profoundly separated by race. And to start this off, I want to draw your attention to the fact that I'm white. So just look at me for a moment, think about it, notice it. And part of being white is that it's a very uncomfortable thing for me to do. And it's taken me many, many years to be able to draw people's attention to my race and see any significance in it. And that's because as a white person, I was socialized to see race as what they had. I was just a person. I was just a white bread, a Heinz 57. I didn't have race. I was socialized to see race as individual acts of discrimination and prejudice, individual acts that anybody could do to anybody else, and if you did those acts, you were a bad person. And that is why, since I saw myself as a good person, I didn't see myself as connected to racism, and certainly didn't see myself as connected to race. In other words, I didn't have a sense of a racial identity. Today I understand that I move through the world always and most particularly as a white person. I have a white frame of reference and I have a white experience. And part of being white is to have that be invisible to us and to be able to live our lives without ever acknowledging that, to see that as non-operative. I now understand racism as a system, as a deeply embedded system, a system that our country was founded on and that all our institutions were created out of. And every institution reinforces this system. And it's a system of unequal power. So let me give you an example. Women in the United States got the right to vote in 1920. And there was only one possible way that we could have gotten the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us, because we literally were not sitting in the seats of institutional power. We could not give ourselves the right to vote. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have personal power, but we didn't have institutional power. And that's the difference between a system and individual acts. Prior to women's suffrage, I could certainly discriminate against men, I could be unfair to individual men, but my group could not systematically deny men as a group the right to vote. And men controlled all the institutions, and they all worked together to convey the message that women's place was here and men's place was there. And that's the difference between individual prejudice and a system of inequality. So in this field, we think about oppression, or in this case racism, as group prejudice backed by institutional power. And so prior to the civil rights movement, it was fairly socially acceptable for white people to just come out and say, we are superior. My father certainly was comfortable saying that. The great joke of Archie Bunker and all of the family was that he wasn't up with the times and he was still saying things that conveyed this idea. But post-civil rights, it became bad to be racist, right? It became unacceptable to be racist. And that seems like a positive thing, right? Racism's bad. But unfortunately, what it morphed into is to make it impossible for white people to look at racism, because what we hear is, I would have to be a bad person in order to perpetuate racism. It became a moral issue. In addition to years of reflection and study of my own racial identity and how it shapes my life and my experience and my perspectives, I've had the very rare opportunity to, for a living, day in and day out, lead primarily white groups of people in discussions of race and racism. And there are some very, very predictable patterns that come up in these conversations. And as I listen to these, it's almost like a script, right? That, like, it's almost as if as white folks, we just pick up this script and we say the same things again and again and again. And as a sociologist, rather than seeing something that's patterned as meaning therefore it's true, I look at something patterned as very revealing of how we get socialized to see things and to see the world. And then the next question that follows that is, and so how does that function? Right? And when we look around us, we can see that although we have changes since the civil rights movement and we have this idea of racism being bad, we still have the same unequal outcomes by race. By every measure, we have racial inequality. So how do we have such different narratives than we had prior to the civil rights movement and still have unequal outcomes? And as I listen to white folks, my group, repeat these narratives over and over, I got this image of a dock, like a pier, and it's just floating on the water, and that's all the superficial things that we say. And you probably recognize some of these, you hear them, maybe you've said them yourself. I don't see color, I was taught to treat everybody the same, I don't care if you're pink, blue, purple, polka dotted, my parents weren't racist, that's why I'm not racist, or my parents were racist, that's why I'm not racist. It doesn't really matter what goes in front of it, the answer is always, I'm not racist, I know people of color, I used to work in the military. All of the things we say to rationalize that we ourselves are not complicit in this system. Now I want to speak to two of these before I kind of take us below the surface of the dock. And one is this idea that our parents taught us to treat everyone the same. And I am just going to put it out there like this: no, they didn't. That is not humanly possible. Human beings are not objective. You cannot be taught to treat or to see everyone the same. And when you say that, you're indicating that you don't understand how socialization works, which is actually a positive thing in the sense that that can direct what you would need to focus on if you want to get deeper understanding. The other one I want to speak to is this common trope of, I don't care if you're pink, purple, polka dotted. If that's in your vocabulary, I would urge you to please drop it and never say it again. Although it isn't intentional, it's actually very demeaning. People don't come in those colors, and what it conveys is that you're not prepared to engage with authenticity. And that's why I have this image of a dock, right? That's very superficial surface. And for me, in trying to understand how all this works, what it means to be white, and live so separate by race, even though I was taught to see myself individually as open-minded and outside of all of this, I've had to go under the surface. And that's why I have this image here now of under the water. You see the pillars or posts that prop up the surface, okay? So, for example, it's very common in discussions of race to have white people tell you about all the people of color in their lives, right? Oh, I have these coworkers, or my best friend, or my second cousin married a black man, or all of the ways that we want everyone to know that we have relationships with people of color, okay? And so we're giving you evidence, right? When someone tells you that, they're giving you evidence. And so what are they giving you evidence of? They're giving you evidence that because they love people of color, know and love people of color, they can't be racist, which means they see racism as conscious dislike or explicit bias or hatred, right? And they're communicating to you that they don't have conscious dislike or hatred, as evidenced by all of these people in their lives. And what we don't understand is the power of implicit bias. Most bias is unconscious. And that makes it very, very dangerous because it drives our behaviors, but we're not aware of it. Yes, it's wonderful to have people of color in your life if you're white. Many, many, many people, white people, don't have people of color in close relationships. But that doesn't mean your life is free of racism. That doesn't mean you don't have a white experience or a white perspective. And it also doesn't mean that racism will not surface in your relationships with people of color. So if we go underneath and we look at the pillars that are supporting that kind of superficial ways that we're taught to think about racism, we see individualism as a very powerful prop or support, this idea that each of us is unique and outside of socialization. We see universalism, which is kind of the opposite of individualism. Individualism says, why can't we all be different? And universalism says, why can't we all be the same? This is a very popular ideology in religious or faith communities. And I'm not arguing that on a deep spiritual level, we're not all universally the same. But we don't live, if you will, in the spiritual realm. We live in the physical realm. And here in the physical realm, we have to ask ourselves, how does it function to say we all bleed under the skin? Well, it functions to take race off the table, to take power off the table, to deny that we have fundamentally different experiences, because racism is real. While race isn't real, in other words, at the biological level, there is no real, true race or racial difference as we're taught to understand it, these very superficial signifiers of racial difference that allow us to categorize people, these are very real in their consequences for people's lives. And this insistence that we're all one doesn't allow us to engage with that social reality. I try to help white people see how race functions in our lives. And I try to move us away from the really obvious, evident examples, such as a racist joke or a racist action, or things that would be recognizable to everybody, right? The kinds of acts that cause people like me, well-meaning people like me, to say, I couldn't possibly be racist, I don't do those things. And I try to help white people understand racism as the very fabric of our society. And I think the most profound example of everyday racism is segregation. That most white people live in racial segregation. While we may work with people of color, when we go home, people of color are rarely at our dinner table. And I don't mean setting our table. I mean sitting and breaking bread with us, true relationships in our lives. Many people can recognize the explicit, kind of conscious dislike type of racism, racist jokes, racist expressions, the KKK. But I want to help white people see the everyday racism that's embedded and that we participate in. And I want to look at neighborhood and school segregation as an example. I'm going to start with this app here. These are the app's founders. It's a new app called The Sketch Factor. And what it does is when you go to a new city, you can put in where you are, and it tells you which neighborhoods to avoid because they're sketchy. And of course, sketchy is very much associated with race and class in the white mind. And so now we have the convenience of segregation through an app. We don't actually have to talk to other white people about, where are the good neighborhoods and the bad neighborhoods. And that good neighborhood, bad neighborhood, good schools, bad schools discourse is an example of new racism. I don't think it gets by anybody that is racially coded language. So this way we can come out and police those racial boundaries without ever kind of naming race. But we all know what we're talking about. And I think the most profound way that my life has been shaped by my race is through the power of segregation. Most white people do live in segregation. We choose that segregation, and in a lot of ways we celebrate it. What makes a school good and what makes a neighborhood good? Well, the absence of people of color. That is the way that white people measure the value of their neighborhoods and schools. And while we don't come out and name that, we all know what it is. So I have had to think very deeply on what it means to have grown up in a primarily white neighborhood, to be born into, to go to school, to study, to learn, to play, to worship, to love, to work, and to die in segregation, and not have one single person who loved, mentored, or guided me convey that there was any loss. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's very profound and I really want us to sit with it. That I could live my whole life in segregation. In fact, if I followed the trajectory that my loving parents laid out for me in my good neighborhood and my good school and my good college and my good career, in which I would ideally rise to the top, I could easily never have any consistent, ongoing, authentic relationships with people of color, and not one person who guided me ever conveyed that there was loss. Just sit with that for a moment, that there is no inherent value in the perspectives or experiences of people of color. If my parents, if my schools, if my curriculum, if my teachers, if my government saw value in those perspectives, I would be given those perspectives, but I wasn't given those perspectives. And that shapes my relationships. It shapes what I care about. It shapes what I see, what I don't see, who I build my life with, and who I don't build my life with. And that is the level where we really need to look at race inside of us and with us. In the line of work that I do, it's a breakthrough if you can get white people to acknowledge that our race privileges us in this society, right? That is like the second coming, to get white folks to admit that we are privileged by our race. But even that begins to get superficial. And you'll hear white people say, just because of the color of my skin, I have these things, as if this is just an accident that happens. And I want to take us deeper. I want to take us inside this skin, My psychosocial development was inculcated in the water of white supremacy. That is what I call this system. I don't mean the KKK. I mean a system in which whiteness and white people are central and seen as inherently superior to people of color. My personality was formed in that water. My worldview was formed in that water. I didn't choose it. It isn't my fault. I'm not racked with guilt about it, but I am responsible for changing it because the default of our society is the reproduction of racism. It's built into every system and every institution. And if we just live our lives and carry on in the most comfortable ways for us, we will necessarily reproduce it. There is no neutral space. Inaction is a form of action. One of the most effective adaptations of racism since the civil rights era is this idea of a racist is a bad person, and if you're not racist, you're a good person. What I call the good-bad binary. And we can all fill it in, right? So if you're a racist, then you're prejudiced and mean-spirited and bigoted and ignorant and Southern and probably drive a pickup truck. So we got some classism in there, right? This is our racist. And if you're not racist, you're good and you're progressive and you're open-minded and you're educated and you're northern. And this binary is probably the #1 construct that keeps racism today in place and makes it nearly impossible to talk to white people about racism. The defensiveness we have comes from this binary. What we hear is, you just said I was a bad person. And so this binary sets it up to be mutually exclusive. You cannot be a good person and be complicit with racism. So you'll notice in the news when racism gets talked about, they'll bring in the evidence they'll have to defend the person that's being accused of racism is, but he's a really nice person. Right? Because again, it's mutually exclusive. We have to understand racism as a system that we're all a part of. You know, I often, in my trainings, after I've kind of laid out kind of how racism works, I'll ask people of color, how often have you given white people feedback on our inevitable, unaware and unintentional, but inevitable racism, and have that go well for you? And you know, there's eye rolls and laughter, and basically the answer is never, right? It's virtually impossible for people of color to give us feedback because that binary sets us up to defend, right? I must at all costs deflect and establish that I am not racist, right? And that makes it so that we can't examine the reality of the society that we live in. And then I'll follow up and ask this question. So what would your daily life be like? This is a question I ask the people of color. If you could simply give us feedback when we step in it, which we inevitably will, and have us receive that with grace, reflect, and seek to do something different. What would your daily life be like? And recently, a man of color in the room, there was a pause, and then he said, it would be revolutionary. And I just want you to sit with that for a minute. Revolutionary, that white people would receive the feedback, reflect, and try to change our behavior. That would be a revolution. And on the one hand, it speaks to how difficult we are, how powerful this binary is to keep us separate, you know, from this system in our minds, but also how simple, and that there are material consequences, right, in heart rate and blood pressure and length of life for people of color, from the ways that would lower the kinds of stress that they have every day navigating all of this from us while we deny that anything's happening. Returning to the pillars underneath the dock, now we can label them, right? So we have individualism, we have universalism, right? Individualism, why can't we all be different? Universalism, why can't we all be the same? They both function to take race off the table. We have internalized superiority that no white person can miss. It was not lost on me that fundamentally it is better to be white. I don't want that belief. I didn't ask for that belief, and I've committed my life to challenging it, but 24/7, that is what society reinforces for me. So internalized superiority is also one of the pillars. The good-bad binary is a very foundational pillar holding up new racism, and segregation, the power of segregation to keep this system in place. And for me, by identifying those pillars, it has helped guide me to then how would I challenge each of those things. And so I urge you to take this journey. It is lifelong. It won't be over in my lifetime. I will never be free of all of the investments in this system that I have that I can't see, but I have committed my life to doing my very best to continually challenge it. And I invite you and in fact urge you to do the same.
Now, welcome back. You have had the discussion that Dr. Robin has raised here, and as I said, it's a discussion that a lot of white people don't want to talk about it more because nobody wants to decline from power. She has talked about deconstructing white privilege, and white privilege refers to an earned advantages that white people have over people of color in certain societies. Unearned advantages, that's what we call white privilege, and no one will ever think of dropping that unearned privileges, you know? Like you are going to look for job opportunities because you are white, you are given first priority in the line, you are given the first seat, you are going to the train only remains one person, and you are black and white, you will find a white person will enter first. So that is unearned advantages. You're going to hospital, you're white, he's black, this white person will have to go in first. So this is something that a lot of white people won't discuss about it because they don't want to drop it, okay? And in society, these advantages can be in education, employment, criminal justice system, healthcare, and more. And when you talk about criminal justice system, you'll get the black people, they are first criminalized and judged easily than the white people. When a white person is found with guilty or having some criminal issues, they'll have to look in twice, thrice, fourth. Like they don't believe, are you the one who snatched the phone? Oh, no, you are not the one. Even if the white person will accept, they will still think he has mental issues. So they'll have to examine him again and again so that they can find a way to remove him off hook. And that is privileges that white people get. And these privileges is not about individual actions or attitude, but about social structures that place white people at an advantage, you know? And that's why Dr. Robin has said it is a systematic. It's not more about individual. It's about a group, a race of white people. So white people, what they should do to decolonize this white privilege, it's called, they should acknowledge systematic inequality. Now, deconstructing white privilege means to recognize that the system that govern the society, like laws, policies, and social norm, have historically been structured to benefit white people. For example, white people may have better access to quality education, quality health, safer neighborhood, or less likelihood of being racially profiled by police. So as white people, they need to acknowledge systematic inequality, and that is the first step of accepting or ending racism in the society, by acknowledging it, talking about it, acknowledging that, of course, this happens. We have to recognize the historical context on it, because white privilege is deeply tied to the historical or history of colonization, segregation, slavery, and other forms of systematic racism. In many countries, particularly in Western context, white people have historically held power over non-white communities. This legacy continues to influence social structures even today. And that's why in South Africa, you may find white people right now are complaining that since ANC took power, or since black took power, they are not happy. It's not that they are not happy. It's because they are not familiar of following laws. They are not familiar of being governed, being controlled. They are not familiar of, standing on the line and waiting for their turn. That's why they are complaining. But black people have been complaining for all over years. And for black, it was worse. Worse than the white people are experiencing. The white people are experiencing the norm. And the norm is that wait for your turn, go in. Go for an interview. If you pass, go in. Follow your line in healthy. Both education to everyone. Both neighborhood, safer for everyone. So they have not, that's not their normality. Their normality is that they want their own neighborhood, their own hospitals, their own schools. Because this privilege has been installed in their mind and they always think that they are better than others. But let me tell you, my white friends and sisters, friends are brothers and sisters, this white privilege or white supremacy is eating you up and it's killing you softly because you get stressed over things that it is normal. Like you are going to the bus station, you are going inside a train maybe, there's some white and black people and the seats, maybe black people have seated down and you are white, you are standing. So in your mind, you are like, I'm special. I'm the one who need to be sitting down. So it is eating you softly. You are going to a place, maybe there's black people, they don't recognize you. You are just like normal as them. So it is eating you in your mind. It's just like a celebrity. Celebrity always think that whenever they go, people recognize them. So if a celebrity goes somewhere and he is not recognized, there's something in his mind. He's questioning himself. Am I not? Am I? So he's having mental problems and mental issues because he is not recognized. Personally, he thinks that since he has 1 million views on YouTube or elsewhere, everyone needs to know him. But he goes a place, nobody knows him. Nobody greets him. So it is eating him up. And that is an example of white supremacy or white privilege, how it's eating black people, how it is eating white people. White people always think they need to have that first priority. So whenever you are in a situation where you are not given white first priority or a privilege, it is eating you up. And that's why whites in South Africa, they are complaining. They want their own country. They want to divide South Africa because they are not familiar or they are not comfortable with the normality of South Africa having black people in power and them being controlled by black people, going to school same as black people, going to, when they want to get a job, interviewed like black people. So it is not their normality. So it is hard for a white person to live a normality because this thing, it is a systematic brainwash that you as a white person, you need to be the best. So the earlier you recognize the white privilege you have and the supremacy, the earlier you acknowledge, the better for you, the healthier you will be. But you will just live criticizing, crying, having mental issues because you haven't acknowledged and understand and accept that everyone is the same. So recognizing the historical context. Another thing is unpacking implicit biases. Part of deconstructing white privilege involves understanding how implicit biases shape people's behaviors and decisions. These biases are often unconscious and contribute to inequalities in the workplace, legal systems, and other areas. Inequalities in workplace, white people are given privileges. And if you don't unpack that, then you go be in a bigger problem. You have to acknowledge the role of intersectionality. White privilege is not uniform. Its interest with other forms of privileges such as class, gender, and sexual orientation. For example, a wealthy white man might experience different privileges compared to a working class white woman. Constructing white privilege also involves in recognizing how race interacts with other factors in shaping people's experiencing. You have to educating others. Part of constructing white privilege is educating others, educating your white brothers and sisters, educating your sons, particularly those who may not be aware of it. Conversations about white privilege can be difficult, and it is difficult, but they are necessary to the society change or by the society change. By fostering understanding and empathy, individuals can help break down systems of privilege. Because if you don't do that, it will just eat you up and up again. Black people are they're familiar with these things. So it is not does not play more of mental affection black people than white people. Standing white fragility. Sometimes when white people are confronted with the reality in their privilege, they must experience discomfort, denial, or defensiveness. This is often refers to white fragility, and we'll talk about that. Constructing white privilege also means pushing past these uncomfortable emotions and engaging with the conversation about the race with openness. Because when you talk about white privilege, you tell a white person that you have this because you are privileged, that because you are privileged, it is not comfortable to them, so they feel uncomfortable, they feel insecure, and that's why some of the time they will say they have fear. It's not fear that white people or black people will do something bad to them. It's a fear that when they talk about these issues, they will decline from power. When they talk about these issues, it is uncomfortable to them. They feel so bad, they don't feel safe. So that's the reason why they say maybe they fear black people. It's not because that there is something bad black people can do to them. It's because they are not comfortable of talking about the racism, talking about white privilege, talking about white supremacy, and all these issues. And as I said earlier, it's not about not being racist, because once we'll say I'm not racist, but you know friends who are racist, you don't talk about them, you don't talk to them. You know your children may be racist, you don't want to talk. Your parents are racist, you are just, as far as I'm not racist, I'm okay. No, it's not just about racism. It's about acknowledging, understanding, educating, and trying to bring change to the society. It's about a group. It's about whole white race. It's not about you individual. Because even if you are not racist and you are enjoying the privileges, you are getting in workplaces first priority, healthcare first priority, you are still differentiating good schools and bad schools, good hospitals and bad hospitals, good neighborhood and bad neighborhood. You are still enjoying the privileges, and it's more than just being racist. It's more than that. As we have said, acknowledge, educate, don't just keep quiet. So we have a lot of things that surrounds white privilege, and the fact that white people, they don't feel safe, they don't feel insecure talking about this, that means that they still want to live under these privileges. They still don't agree that it favors them. They still want to be in control. They still living under a system that is racist. They still enjoying a system that is biased. They still enjoying a system that does not support equality. And even if personally you are not racist, but you are enjoying these things and you are not talking, you are not educating people about it, then you're just the same. So it is high time that when we need to end this thing, we need to discuss. When I see white people discussing about racism, I feel good. When I see white people discussing about privileges, on social media, number of people are watching these videos. Your white brothers are watching. You are helping. So white people should come out and talk about these things. Because as I said, white privilege not only makes black people feel bad, but it is good for your mental to accept earlier. Okay? Tell me what you think on the comment section about this video. Until next episode, peace out.